My parents spent my wedding fund on my twin sister, so I cut them off after rejecting my mom's selfish demand. My parents always favored my twin sister so much that they ended up spending the money meant for my wedding on her. That was the last straw for me. I cut them off completely after rejecting my mother's selfish demand. I am 23 years old, and I have a twin sister, Jessica. But we are not on good terms. Scratch that we do not even speak, and I do not talk to my parents either. We used to at least be civil, even with how they treated me in the past, but for the last 2 years, I have kept my distance. They never reached out to me either, until recently. Jessica is 12 minutes older than me, which, in my parents' eyes, made her the golden child by default. They had only planned for one kid, and when they found out they were having twins, they panicked. They simply did not have the financial means to raise two children. But by the time they knew, it was too late, and my mom decided not to take any risks. I did not learn about this until high school, when my uncle, after having one too many drinks at Thanksgiving, blurted it out. That was the moment I stopped trying to win my parents' love. They had made their choice a long time ago. They brought two kids into this world, but only had enough love for one. And that lucky child was Jessica. Ever since we were little, the rivalry between me and Jessica was intense. If she did something well, I would try to do it better, hoping that maybe, just maybe, her parents would finally notice me. But instead of being proud of me, they seemed to resent me even more for outshining their favorite. And Jessica? She never even cared about being better than me. She just wanted to be praised. So she would pretend that my achievements hurt her feelings, and people would rush to comfort her. She knew how to manipulate a situation to make herself the victim, and she did it well. It worked every time. My parents, some of our relatives, and even people from school would always take her side. So, while I worked hard for good grades and threw myself into extracurricular activities, all she had to do was act upset, and she got what she really wanted: attention, validation, and sympathy. Looking back, I do not regret my hard work. It got me where I am today, but I do wish I had rubbed my success in her face a little more back then. 2 years ago, we turned 21. By then, both of us had graduated. Jessica barely made it through a regular college, while I had earned my degree from one of the top business schools in the state. Not only that, but I had also been valedictorian and studied on a full scholarship, meaning my parents saved a lot of money on my education. You would think they would be proud of me, right? Nope. They barely acknowledged my achievements and focused entirely on Jessica and her uncertain future. She was struggling to find a job, getting rejection after rejection, while I had already started an internship at a respected firm. But all they cared about was her. They did not even congratulate me. I should not have been surprised, but I could not help feeling disappointed. At the time, I still lived at home. I had not saved up enough to move out yet, so I bit my tongue and kept my feelings to myself. But after our 21st birthday, I could not hold it in anymore. I had expected them to do something nice for both of us, but the day before, I found a note on the kitchen counter. It said they had gone to the beach with Jessica and her friends and would be back in a few days. They took her and her friends on a trip and left me home alone with nothing but a $50 gift card and a happy birthday note. That was the moment I snapped. My childhood had been unfair in so many ways, but this was pure cruelty. That same day, I decided I was done. I was moving out, and I was never looking back. A couple of my friends were kind enough to let me crash at their place while I figured things out. I did not need long. I was confident my internship would turn into a full-time job, so I just needed somewhere to stay for 2 months, at most. I packed my bags and left without telling my parents or my sister. And you know what? They never even reached out. Not once. The only time they called me was the day after I moved out, and it was not to check on me. It was to let me know they would be back from their trip soon and that I should probably call a plumber because one of the faucets was leaking. I told them I did not live there anymore. I had moved out. I expected some kind of reaction, a hint of concern, maybe even a little regret, but all I got was silence. My parents barely acknowledged it, and Jessica could not have cared less. And that was it. That was the last time I had a real conversation with them. In the 2 years since then, I have never gone back. They never reached out to me, and I never reached out to them. I have heard about Jessica here and there through mutual friends, but that is about it. My parents know nothing about my life, and I know nothing about theirs. But I have worked hard. I have built a life for myself. I have my own place now. It is not a huge house, but it is a nice apartment in a good neighborhood. The rent is affordable with my salary, and considering how many people my age are still struggling, I would say I am doing pretty well. I had settled into a life of my own, one that I had built from the ground up without any help from my family. My rent was affordable, my job was stable, and I had managed to create a comfortable space for myself. Most people my age were still struggling to get on their feet, so I felt lucky to be where I was. I did not waste time thinking about my parents or my twin sister, Rachel. She had gotten married a couple of months ago to some businessman almost 10 years older than her and was now living it up in California. I figured my family was fine without me, and I was fine without them. But 2 days ago, everything changed. I got a call from my uncle telling me I needed to get to the hospital immediately. My parents had been in a bad car accident, and they wanted to see me. As much as I had tried to shut them out, I was not heartless. So I went. When I got there, I found out they had already been in the hospital for a couple of days. They had survived the crash but suffered serious injuries. A truck had slammed into their car, and the damage was bad. And of course, they had no health insurance. My dad had always believed that as long as we took care of ourselves, we would never need a hospital. One of the dumbest things I had ever heard, but that was just how he was. And now, they were stuck with a massive medical bill. The first person they had called was Rachel. She told them flat out that she was not coming back and would not be helping them. She had just married a rich man, but apparently it was tacky to ask for financial help so soon after the wedding. She did not want to look like a gold digger to her husband. She also refused to fly back, claiming she could not abandon her family. And by family, she meant her husband's 2 kids from his previous marriage, not even her own children. But she was too busy playing the perfect wife and mother to come home and see her actual parents in the hospital. Not that she could have helped them anyway. If her husband was not there to cover the bills, she would not have even been able to afford the plane ticket back home. She was just a stay-at-home wife, taking care of kids that were not even hers. So much for being the golden child. And then came the kicker. My uncle pulled me aside and told me that my parents now expected me to pay their medical bills. It was a huge amount, and covering it would put me in a tough spot financially. I had worked too hard to get where I was. I was not about to throw away my savings on people who had never cared for me. They had other family members who could help, and even if no one else stepped up, they would figure something out. But they wanted my money because they knew it would be less humiliating than borrowing from relatives. And they promised I would get the money back. Soon. Yeah, right. I did not know what to do. I had 2 choices: refuse to help them and be seen as a terrible daughter, or give them my hard-earned money and pray I ever saw a dime of it again. If I was being completely honest with myself, I did not want to help them at all. We had not spoken in 2 years. They had treated me like I was invisible for most of my life. They were strangers to me now. But if I turned them down, would I be just as bad as Rachel? That thought bothered me more than anything. Was I a bad person for not wanting to help my parents after everything they had done to me? After thinking about it, I made my decision. I was not going to pay for their hospital bills. It was not easy. There was a small part of me that felt guilty, but deep down I knew they would be fine. They had just not wanted to ask their other relatives for help because of their pride. That was not my problem. It has been 5 days since I saw them, and after reading through some of the comments from people who knew about my situation, I realized something: I was still competing with Rachel, even when I did not mean to. She had refused to help them, so I had felt like I needed to step up just to prove I was the better sibling. But why did I even care? I had spent my whole life trying to compete with someone who never had to try. It was exhausting, and I needed to let it go. A lot of people pointed out how ridiculous it was that my parents never had health insurance, and they were right. My dad had never even insured his car because he thought he was such a great driver. If the accident had been his fault, they would have had to pay for repairs out of their own pockets too. As for their financial situation, they were not broke. They were not rich, but they were not struggling. My dad worked as the sales head of his company, and my mom had a job in human resources. They had more than enough to live on, especially since they no longer had to support me or Rachel. So why could they not pay their own bills? If they could borrow money and promise to pay it back, then they could just pay for their own medical expenses. They never gave me a real answer, and honestly, I did not care enough to push for one. Eventually, I picked up the phone. They had been calling me for days, and I finally decided to stop ignoring them. I told them I was not going to help them. As expected, they did not take it well. My mom, injured ribs and all, managed to yell at me over the phone. She called me ungrateful and selfish, the usual. My dad did not even bother arguing. He just told me I was no longer their daughter and hung up. And you know what? It did not hurt like I thought it would. I had stopped being their daughter a long time ago. They had not spoken to me in 2 years, had not even checked up on me. all because I had moved out after they ignored my birthday. This was just them finally saying out loud what I had known for years. I had no parents. After that, my uncle called, trying to guilt trip me into changing my mind. I hung up on him before he could even get through his first sentence. Then he sent me a message, letting me know that my parents still had one option left. They had been saving up a wedding fund for Rachel and me, but they had already spent more than half of it on Rachel's wedding. And the rest? They had used it on a trip to Europe. That was why they could not pay for their own medical bills. They had blown through their savings on my sister's wedding and a vacation and now expected me to clean up their mess. My uncle probably thought that would make me feel guilty. It did not. It just made me relieved that I had not wasted my own money on them. They had made their choices. Now, they could go to their other relatives for help, or they could deal with the consequences. Either way, I was done. As expected, they did not take it well. My mother, despite her broken ribs, managed to yell at me with everything she had, calling me ungrateful and selfish, the same old routine. My father barely said any, just told me I was no longer their daughter and hung up the phone as soon as my mother was finished. I had braced myself for the sting of their rejection, but when it finally came, I felt nothing. I had not been their daughter for a long time. I honestly could not even recall the last time I had felt loved by them. They had ignored me on purpose for 2 years, all because I had dared to move out after they acted like my birthday did not matter. So, really, this did not change a thing. I had already been living without parents for years. Of course, my uncle could not let things go. Not even 5 minutes after my father hung up, he called to give me his own speech about how I was abandoning my family in their time of need. I barely let him get a full sentence out before I ended the call. I was not about to let anyone guilt trip me into giving away my hard-earned money. A few minutes later, he texted me. Apparently, my parents had finally decided to dip into the wedding fund they had saved for me and my sister, Rachel. Except, there was barely anything left in it. They had already spent the majority of it on Rachel's wedding, and whatever was left had gone toward their dream vacation in Europe. And now they were broke. So that was the real reason they could not pay their own bills. Not because they had no income, not because they were struggling, but because they had spent all their savings on Rachel's big day and an expensive vacation. The only thing my uncle's message did was make me feel relief. Relief that I had not stepped in to cover their expenses. They had made irresponsible choices, and I was not going to be the one to fix them. They could borrow money from someone else or figure it out on their own. It was no longer my concern. Something strange happened today, and I just need to get this out. I have not been able to tell any of my friends about all this, because most of the people I spend time with now have not known me long enough for me to be comfortable opening up about my past. So this is the only place I can vent. It has been almost 2 weeks since I last spoke to my parents, and then, out of nowhere, Rachel showed up at my door. I was stunned. First of all, I had no idea how she even found out where I lived. But then she told me one of our old high school friends had mentioned the neighborhood I was in, and she had asked around until she found my exact address. That was a lot of effort on her part just to track me down, of all people. But when I opened the door, I barely recognized her. She had changed a lot. Everything about her was different: her clothes, her hair, even the way she spoke. She had this polished, elegant way of carrying herself now, nothing like the Rachel I remembered from before. It was strange, like I was looking at a stranger wearing my sister's face. But one thing had not changed: who she was on the inside. You can put on a fancy dress, expensive jewelry, and designer makeup, but that does not change what is underneath. I let her inside, more out of curiosity than anything else. I wanted to know what had made her go through all this trouble just to see me. She did not get to the point right away. Instead, she talked about herself. For 15 full minutes, I just sat there nodding while she bragged about her amazing life. She was a stay-at-home wife now, taking care of her husband's 2 toddlers, spending her days at fancy luncheons, and making sure her nails were perfect. She even tried to convince me to do the same, like giving up my career to become a housewife was something I would ever be interested in. I nearly laughed, but I waited. Eventually, she stopped talking about herself long enough to explain why she was really here. Apparently, our parents had been begging her to come back after the accident. Not for money, they just wanted her to be there. She had finally given in after 2 weeks and made the trip home. And while she was here, she figured she might as well visit me, so we could put the past behind us. At first, it sounded harmless enough, but then she started complaining. She was irritated that our parents were being too needy. She was furious that they expected her to be there for them. She went on and on about how they were being disrespectful of her new family, how it was so unfair that she had to leave her 2 babies behind with their nanny just to visit them. I still do not understand why she keeps calling those kids hers. They are not. They are her husband's children from his previous marriage. She was frustrated because she felt like she was being pulled between 2 world-sour parents and the life she had built with her wealthy husband. She had not come to check on me because she missed me. She had come because she wanted sympathy. And then, after all that, she finally told me what she really wanted. She was leaving in 2 days. She had promised our parents she would stay for a month, but she was already sick of listening to them talk about the accident over and over again. She was tired of them acting like their suffering was the most important thing in the world. So she wanted me to take her place. She wanted me to step in so she could leave without feeling guilty. She had no idea our parents had already cut me off again. They had not even mentioned me to her. That was how little I mattered to them. It was classic Rachel. She had always known how to manipulate people into taking responsibility for things she did not want to deal with. I had no intention of telling her that I knew what she was doing. That would have just led to an argument, and I was not in the mood for one. So I told her I would think about it. She left, telling me to stay in touch, but we both knew that was not going to happen. As soon as she walked out the door, I blocked her number. Honestly, she was just as self-centered as ever, and spending even an hour with her had drained me. I could barely get a word in while she talked about her perfect life, but from the way she described it, all I heard was emptiness. Her husband had only married her so he could get custody of his kids. She did not seem to realize it, or maybe she did and just did not want to admit it. She spent all her time taking care of children who were not hers, throwing parties, and pretending to be part of a glamorous world that did not really belong to her. She thought she had won, that she had the better life. But honestly, I felt sorry for her. And I felt even sorrier for our parents, because they had spent their entire lives choosing her over me, and now they were paying the price. Rachel told me all of this with a smug smile, bragging about how she had saved those kids like she was some kind of saint, but all I could hear was how she had been played. Her husband had only known her for a year before proposing, and anyone with common sense could see what was really going on. He did not love her, he just needed someone to make his custody battle look better. Nobody falls in love that fast, especially not a man fresh out of a divorce. But Rachel either did not see it or did not want to. Or maybe she did and just did not care. Maybe the luxury, the status, and the expensive lifestyle made it easy for her to ignore the truth. Maybe she was fine with being nothing more than a glorified babysitter to someone else's kids, as long as it came with the right price tag. And yet, despite everything, she was furious at our parents for wanting her by their side after the accident. She made it sound like they were personally trying to ruin her life. She acted like their injuries were nothing more than an inconvenience that kept her from playing house with her new family, a husband, who, at best, tolerated her, and 2 kids who were just as happy with their nanny as they were with her. If ungrateful had a face, it would be hers. I am not a fan of my parents, not by a long shot, but listening to her talk about them like they were some kind of burden was mind-blowing. These were the same people who had spent their entire lives bending over backward for her, ignoring me at every turn just to make sure she had everything she wanted. And now, when they needed her, she could not even fake concern. Then she got to the real reason she had come. She was leaving in 2 days. She had promised mom and dad she would stay for a month, but apparently that was too much for her. She was already tired of hearing about the accident, already sick of them talking about their injuries like it was the worst thing in the world. She needed to get back to her real life as soon as possible. And now she wanted me to take her place. She wanted me to patch things up with them, step in as their emotional support, so she would not have to feel guilty about abandoning them. The funny thing is, she had no idea they had already cut me off again. She did not know that I had refused to pay their hospital bills, that they had basically disowned me all over again. She had not even considered the possibility that our parents did not think about me at all. Rachel had not come because she missed me. She had not come because she wanted to make amends. She had come because she was tired of playing the role of the caring daughter and wanted someone else to pick up the slack. Classic Rachel. I knew what she was doing, but I had no interest in arguing with her. That would have just dragged things out, and I wanted her out of my apartment as fast as possible. So I told her I would think about it, knowing full well that I never would. She left after telling me to keep in touch, but we both knew she did not mean it. And honestly, I was relieved to see her go. Not just because she was an insufferable, self-absorbed person, but because she was downright boring. I barely got a word in the entire time she was here. She just droned on and on about her glamorous California life, her picture-perfect marriage, and how wonderful it was to be a stay-at-home wife. But all I could hear was emptiness. Her life revolved around parties, her husband's kids, and pretending she belonged in some high society world. She thought she had won, that she had built something better than I ever could. But to me, it just sounded pathetic. Her husband did not love her. Her stepkids would always prefer their biological mother over her, and she had nothing of her own. Nothing she had worked for, nothing she had built. Just a life that was entirely dependent on a man who could leave her whenever he wanted. She thought she was on top of the world. I just felt sorry for her. And I felt even sorrier for my parents. They had spent their whole lives prioritizing her over me, giving her everything, making sure she always came first. And now, the daughter they had chosen had left them behind without a second thought. I have made the right choice. I do not want to be anything like them, and I do not want them in my life. They are selfish, they are cruel, and I honestly doubt they are capable of caring about anyone but themselves, especially Rachel. It is almost embarrassing to think that I am related to them, but at least now, it is over. I have cut them off for good, and I doubt they will be able to reach me again anytime soon. I blocked Rachel as soon as she walked out the door. I had already blocked my parents and most of my extended family days ago. So I think I am finally free, and I pray that it stays that way, because I am better off without them.